Live now with Shawn Washburn, who is a manufacturing engineer with 25 years experience specializing in helping companies solve problems, streamline and automate processes, and maximize the value of their people. And Shawn is also the host of the Engineering Your Business podcast. Shawn, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Andy. Excited about being on here.
Yeah, I am as well. You and I have, I don't know, known each other for a few years, interacted on social media, supported each other here and there, chatted here and there. And I'm excited to kind of dig in to some of the work you've been doing and talk about some important concepts like curiosity and creativity and communication and how we can all improve in our careers, whether we're running a business or, operating as an engineer or a project manager or maybe an author and speaker or podcaster or whatever, right? There's always things that we can improve and nothing that a spreadsheet can't help, right?
Right.
So we'll get into that. But I want to start with a little bit of background on you and your career. You've always been in engineering? Did you always want to be an engineer? How did you get to where you are today?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I didn't really even know much about engineering until maybe junior year in high school. And I liked math and science and that kind of stuff, and met with the guidance counselor, and he's like, maybe you should check out engineering. So I had an uncle who was a civil engineer, but that's a little different. And ended up going that route, went mechanical engineering at college and stayed with it all 4 years and got out. I interned for 4 years when I was in school in the summers as like in a consulting engineering firm. And then I graduated and they didn't have a position. So I was like trying to figure out what to do. And it was funny because that was consulting that didn't pan out. And then a manufacturing job opened up. I was living in Columbus, Ohio, and this was down in Cincinnati. Took the first job and the rest is history. I've been in manufacturing for 25 years and I'm glad it went that route because I really love the hands-on, being able to see and touch and be a part of that whole process. So,
yeah. Fun fact, I put this in my book. I really wanted to be an engineer when I was in high school. I thought I wanted to be a civil engineer. I loved roads and bridges and design. I loved math and physics. And when I got to college at the University of Florida, I chose a civil engineering major. And again, was great with physics and calculus, but I could not do chemistry to save my life. And even though I don't think you need any chemistry to be a civil engineer, you had to pass one chemistry class. And I just couldn't do it. I couldn't make it through. Now, part of that was because I had joined a fraternity and I was out drinking every night and not studying as much as I could have or should have. But I never made it through. I ended up changing my major to business. And, it's all part of the journey, got me to where I am today. But I admire that you were able to power through that and build that engineering career.
Yeah, you and me are the same though with chemistry. That was not, somehow I passed it, but my experiments never looked the way that they're supposed to when they finished. So.
Yeah, it's tough. Some people love it, right? It's all depends on your personality, and you picked a career that was a good fit for you. And so as you've gone, how did you get into, it's one thing to kind of just be an engineer and do the job that you're doing, but I know you've gotten into a little bit of consulting and really thinking kind of on a bigger picture level of how organizations approach things like people, culture, processes, to really, not only find efficiencies, but obviously be more successful.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that's as time's gone on, and I've interacted with people I knew or just different connections that were made, I realized that a lot of how I was wired or things I had learned through manufacturing, through problem solving, communication, and just like I say, the way I'm wired, I'm more on the creative and communication side of an engineer. And I just saw a lot of that play out. And you mentioned the spreadsheet thing. That was one of the ones too that I think for years, something that you're good at, whatever it is, and other people are like, oh, I hate doing this. And you might look at something and be like, this is easy, right? And so that's kind of how it was with Excel and spreadsheets. And so I think that's kind of where a lot of that started, was, being able to take a problem and see, okay, I already know how to automate this, or, you're doing it this way. And, a lot of my work right now is looking at a lot of processes and workflows and how to make that more efficient. And so a lot of that transitions over when you do it in one area, it can transition over to another.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, we are recording this live on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube. If you are joining us live, say hey, where are you joining from? And if you have a question, feel free to pop in and ask a question about engineering processes, creativity, any career questions. We had some mutual friends who popped in supporting us. So we have comments from Jeremy Allen, who said so good, and John Vandermeulen, who sent his support. As well as Adrian Brightfeld, who said, good to see you. Great stuff as always. So we appreciate all the support from friends who are tuning in and supporting us. Shawn, when it comes to thinking about the work that we're doing, and you and I were kind of going back and forth on what we're going to talk about, you suggested a topic that is one of my absolute favorite in the world, which is curiosity. And this is something where the other day I was doing a Q&A for a company, and somebody asked me, I think it was the big Zoom webinar that I was doing recently. And someone asked, what's the number one skill or thing that you recommend to be successful in any type of career, which is like a big bucket. And the thing I went to was curiosity. I think there's nothing that can serve you better in a career, no matter what you're doing, than curiosity. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that, how that served you well, and why you suggested that as such an important topic.
Yeah, it's funny that we both resonate so well with that. I don't know. I think one thing about it is there's plenty of things that can take a long time to skills that you have to either pay to learn or take time to develop. And curiosity is like one that you don't have to be anybody. You don't have to have any standing or a title or whatever to. Now you do have to kind of train yourself to look at things differently. But I've always been. We have where I work, we have a lot of high school groups come in, which I've missed that with all the COVID and everything. But we'd have groups come in, and that's one thing I always challenged the high schoolers with was just to be curious about. A lot of them already said, maybe they're juniors and seniors, and they're like, hey, I'm gonna major in this. I'm gonna do this. And the reality, I mean, you've pivoted a lot of times, and the reality is, you don't know what you're going to be doing in 5 years. That position may not even exist now, but it doesn't cost anything to not only be curious about your career and things that are out there, but also like I say at work, problem solving, be curious about why, okay, this thing's not working right. Maybe it's something at your house. Like, it bugs me if I can't dig down to what the root cause is, because it's always this, mystery box. So I just think, with my kids, the same thing, like just ask, learn to ask more questions, learn how to ask better questions. And because it's like we talked about, doesn't cost you anything. And yet in the end, there's so much knowledge that's out there. You're big into crypto, right? I'm like, didn't know anything about it. And I spent a weekend with my cousin, and he's really big into crypto. I was like, oh, you should be Andy, right?
Right.
But like at some point you didn't know anything about it, and you were curious and you learned about it. So like, I think that's how we learn and grow. And we've never had so much information at our fingertips that make that easy to do than we do.
But
now.
What's funny, you brought up crypto, and I've really gotten deep into cryptocurrency, blockchain, non-fungible tokens, NFTs this year, just studying and finding everything I can, and obviously, and investing in it as well. But what I think about it, and plenty of people have this story, but I first heard about Bitcoin in probably 2011 or 2012, something like that. And my reaction at the time was, that's not for me. That's not something that I invest in. That's for, shady people, drug dealers, right? Well, I made some assumption about it, right?
Yeah.
And I put it aside and didn't go back to it until the very beginning of 2021. Now, a lot of people did that. That was normal. That's why it wasn't worth very much back then, and it's worth a lot more now. However, if I had led with complete curiosity and said, oh, that's interesting, I'd like to find out more about this, and, found something to convince me to invest a significant amount of money in it, I would be a multimillionaire right now, not needing to work, because I had invested early in Bitcoin, right? But I didn't because I wasn't curious. I made an assumption that that is not something that's for me, and I didn't follow any type of curiosity. And that's just one example, right, that you maybe think of, because we make so many assumptions and judgment calls in life. We just see things, we see people doing things, and we're just like, oh, that's not for me. I don't like the way they're doing that. That I've tried that before, that never worked, right? And you see it all the time at work in companies versus like, oh, let me get curious and find out what I know, what I don't know, what maybe we could change, what could be improved, and like, who knows, maybe I should invest.
Mm. Yeah, and I think, I mean, you brought up assumptions. That I think curiosity and assumptions, like when I've had co-ops work with me, I usually challenge them to kind of question everything that they see and everything I tell them too. I'm like, just because I tell you something and this is the way we do it doesn't mean it's the best way. So, and the ones who've taken me up on that, I mean, they've really said, we found some good improvements on things that we hadn't noticed. And the assumption thing, I love talking about assumptions too, because like, I mean, you have to make assumptions throughout your day. Who knows how many assumptions you make? Like, you don't even think about it. You just,
Mhm.
this thing, is the floor in your house going to give way? Probably not.
Right.
But when we don't acknowledge what we are assuming, like if we're trying to solve a problem, that's when we run into issues, because I like to think of like, you have to take each assumption and set it in a chair, like with the interrogator light, right? And ask it tough questions. If it can stand up to the questions, then okay, you can move on, and that you can trust that foundation of that assumption. But if you kind of just skip on to step 3, and I find it happen all the time at work with we have if a machine's down or whatever, it always comes back to the thing that we weren't even thinking about, that we just, well,
Mm.
it can never be that, right?
Yeah.
And I think too, I know you've talked a lot about, assumptions in the realm of maybe limiting beliefs too, right? You
Yeah.
just assume that, like, as you challenged me on this, like not too long ago, about being a leader in a certain area, and just,
Yeah.
who am I to not take on some
Right.
certain
Or we
role or
we we dis
responsibility or
we
whatever.
disqualify ourselves before we even have a shot, right? Because just assume, oh, I can't do that, or people won't. Another story from my childhood. We talk about the engineering thing. I tell this a lot. I told it in the book as well. I grew up playing baseball. My dream was to be a professional baseball player, but I was an average player, probably at best. I could have been better. But when I got to high school at 15, I quit. I didn't even try out for the team because
Mm.
my high school had what I perceived to be a very good baseball team, and I just figured they're really good. I'm not even going to make it. Like, how ridiculous, and I'm like so embarrassed of that now, right? Because like, why not at least try out? Let them tell me no, you can't play. Instead, I just disqualified myself before I even gave it a shot. And that was the end of my baseball career, by the way. Haven't played since then.
Have you seen the 100 Days of Rejection video series on YouTube?
No, I haven't.
This is from a couple years ago. I can't remember the guy. I think he ended up going on and doing a TED talk about this, but it was really fascinating because it's kind of like assumptions, but like for him, it was a fear. He got sick of being afraid to do things.
Yeah.
You even asked for like, extra mayonnaise at
Right.
dinner or something like that.
Yeah.
And he kind of got sick of being in this cocoon of like that fear. And so he
Right.
challenged himself to 100 days in a row, and he recorded on YouTube, like he'd go and ask something with the goal being to get
Of
a
being rejected.
rejection.
Yeah.
And I thought it was really interesting because I think the end result was like more than 50% of the time the people said yes. Like, so
Right.
he failed his test, but if he'd never even asked, he wouldn't have gotten these things. So like I've
Right.
been the same way, like you're talking about with this is probably going to go this way, so I'm not even going to
Yeah.
try it.
Right. But you don't get what you don't ask for, right? And I've learned that. I spent
Yeah.
most of my life being afraid of rejection, and I've made some big changes there because I realized you don't get what you don't ask for. And like, obviously you got to ask, things have to be, it's got to be appropriate, right? Like the right tone and person and
Mhm.
situation and all that sort of thing. But yeah, I've seen some of those. There was a challenge I once saw where you're supposed to go places and ask for a discount when you have no reason to, like go up to Starbucks and order a cup of coffee and say, "Can I have a discount?" And
Yeah.
it's like this scary thing because they're going to say no, but sometimes they don't. Sometimes you're like, oh, because the other side of it is people don't like saying no, And so a lot of times
Right.
people found that they would get discounts because the person working at the counter would be like, well, I don't want to reject them. So let me find a way. We're like, oh, maybe I can give you a 10% discount or something like that on your coffee. It's just the whole thing is fascinating psychology. But going back to the topic at hand, it all comes down to, can we be curious instead of saying, oh, if I do this, I'll get rejected, or I've tried this before, it's never going to work. Getting curious and saying, I wonder what would happen if, I wonder
Mm.
what that person is thinking. I wonder what they'd say, if I ask the question. So that's curiosity. Another thing I know you love to talk about is creativity. And for a long time, I don't think I thought of myself as being particularly creative. I do think of myself that way now. And our friend Jeremy Allen asked a question, which was, can a defined process lead to better creativity?
Hmm. That's a good question. Um, can a defined process? I don't know. I'm not sure how to. I mean, I know having things defined definitely gets you, like, what's expected, and it probably does give you more freedom to be creative versus, if you're, I guess it depends, if you're doing something for someone else and the steps you're supposed to take, like you've got an SOP laid out and it's telling you what steps to go down. I guess that gives you some freedom to be able to say, hey, as long as I'm meeting these criteria, then here's the area over here where I can mix in some of myself or some creative aspect to it. So versus, I think you could be creative, and if things aren't defined, usually you probably get into trouble because you didn't have a clear understanding beforehand between two people.
Hmm. How do we create more creativity for ourselves? And it's interesting for you being an engineer, someone so focused on process performance. Someone would look at that and say, well, he's all about process, not really about creativity. But there is an opportunity to create a lot more creativity in our life, in our career, our business, whatever it may be. How do you think about that, and how do you what do you recommend for people to become more creative, or feel like they are more creative?
Um, well, so just to start with, like, that's what I do. My job is problem solving and processes and stuff like that. But like, I'm kind of if you remember the Charlie in the box from the Rudolph claymation thing, is
Mm,
like this. He doesn't he doesn't fit in with the rest. That's kind of how I viewed
yeah.
myself for years as an engineer, because I like to write. I like to be humorous with things and kind of like not as serious sometimes as maybe we're supposed to be. Sometimes it gets me in trouble, but sometimes I feel like you can come up with new ways to do things, make things more fun or enjoyable. Um, I think that a way to, I guess, foster that creativity is just um, maybe, okay, looking at what the rules are, but where, yeah, I guess maybe let's look at it from maybe if you're the leader in the group and you're trying to foster creativity in your people, is to let them know that it's okay to do things their own way. Like, here, give them that margin to step outside the box. So like, even with these co-ops that have come in, yeah, ask and be curious and ask questions, but I also want them to, like each of them comes in with their own skill set, their own like ways of viewing things, and I want them to do it their way. Because sometimes their way, like maybe it's some visual presentation or a way they're communicating something. Um, I guess not to be, back to the assumption thing, not to just assume like everyone's going to want to see it this way. Everyone's going
Mm,
to want it communicated. Like, maybe you communicate something in a different way than people normally are used to getting it, but that's your creative angle, and sometimes that ends up being kind of refreshing to kind of break the mold, kind of like meetings, right? Meetings are like always a big topic, right? Do you have to have the meeting, or if you have a meeting, can
right.
you do it the way it's not been done all the time and make it
Yeah.
more engaging?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, people love to hate meetings, right? But how often do we step back and say, well, can we do this differently? Do we even have to have the meeting? We can have a whole conversation about meetings. We did a great comment from Paul Zamora, who said curiosity and creativity goes great with music. I have tried all kinds of instruments that I can or have never played. it's like it's the learning and figuring out is what makes it fun and a great learning experience. And Shawn, I see you have a guitar behind you. Are you a musician?
Just of that instrument right there.
Yeah.
That's about it. It's actually a Washburn guitar. I've never bought my own guitar. I've played for years, and I finally I saw one that was a good deal the other day and got it. So yeah, I like playing that. But I like to hand drum. Those are my two instruments. And I played trombone when I was growing up in marching band.
Yeah.
But those, yeah.
I never got into playing any musical instruments. I wish I had, other than like hand drumming on my legs or my stomach. But I can see the creativity in that, and I love listening to music and the creativity of different types of music. So we've talked about curiosity and creativity. I want to talk about process a little bit as well, because I know this is an area of expertise for you, and I think this is something we can all benefit from. How do we look at a process or something that we're doing on a regular basis and find more efficiencies, eliminate waste? I mean, we all only have, we'll say 168 hours in a week, 24 hours a day, that kind of thing. You see some people who are way more productive than others. And sometimes that comes down to them eliminating waste and just spending their time a lot more effectively than others. So how do you think about that, both from a organizational standpoint and maybe from an individual standpoint?
Yeah. So one thing that's interesting, like we get into a lot of automation at work, and I mean, I think everywhere, whether it's digitally online or with actual machinery, automation's a big thing. One thing I've found with automation is, the goal is always like to get this thing just kind of running on its own. But what happens in the process is it forces you to, if you haven't had really clearly defined processes and steps or decision making that happens in your whatever you're doing, it forces you to answer those questions. And so I think that's where one of the keys to becoming more efficient in any process is to have everything laid out in front of you. A lot of times I've been working with some small businesses, and there's just a few of them there, and the owners have been doing this for years, and so like they were trying to get things offloaded off their plate. And what they found was like so much of it was in their head, and so like they were getting asked a lot of questions because they hadn't had time to really sit down and lay out the answers to different questions they're being asked. But we did a process not too long ago where I work called a value stream map. It's like a engineer or a manufacturing kind of term thing, but it's basically we laid out on a big piece of paper like every single step and decision that happens from like when material came into our place to when a part went out. And when you could see it all in front of you, all of a sudden you start to see things that you didn't see before. And I think that's where we realize, okay, lean manufacturing is a terminology that's kind of gotten into other areas too. And there's like these 8 wastes that they talk about. And one of the big ones is always like waiting and things that you don't usually think about, but waiting costs you time. And sometimes someone's waiting for an answer from you, or you're waiting for someone to make a decision on something. And when you can even identify those things, like you have to put on the different glasses of like, okay, which part of this process are we waiting on things, or where are we doing extra work that the customer really they don't care about. Maybe we're doing it to try to give them a better product or whatever, but yeah, but I think a lot of it comes down to just, like I say, that visual, laying things out in front of you, because when it's in your head, it's really hard to identify, and you make decisions and you jump ahead in things because, well, I guess another thing is to have somebody come in who's totally unfamiliar with what you're doing. And, maybe you have a procedure, have them walk
Like an
through
audit.
it. Yeah. Yeah. And have them walk through it with fresh eyes and say like, they might ask questions that you haven't thought about because you
Like,
already
why are you
answered
doing
them
it
in your
this way?
head.
And you've been doing it that way for years. You're like, this is the way we always done it.
Yeah, I think that's always really healthy because, it may you almost need people to step on toes, because you may have had things instilled in your organization, just ways of doing things or whatever, that haven't either no one's been allowed to challenge those, or, just haven't had someone come in who's been able to kind of unearth, and ask good questions like that, maybe this worked 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And, maybe now it's a good time to re-examine and say, hey, there's totally new technology out there, new ways to do this.
Interesting. Yeah, for some reason that reminds me of this story that I've heard a few times, that Tamara Levitt tells through in this meditation on the Calm app about this woman who's roasting a ham and cuts the end off of it. And her husband asks, "Why do you always cut the end off of a ham when you're cooking it?" And she said, "I don't know. That's the way my mom taught me to do it." And she goes to her mother and says, "Mom, why do we always cut the end off of the ham when we bake the ham?" And her mom says, "I don't know. That's the way I learned it from my mother." And then she goes to her mother, the grandmother, and says, "Mom, why do we always cut the end off of the ham?" And her mother says, "Well, when you were little, we lived in this small apartment with a tiny oven, and the entire ham couldn't fit in there, so we always cut the end off so that it would fit." And it's like, oh, now we've always been doing that for generations when it doesn't make any sense anymore. We don't need to do
Right.
that. We've got a bigger oven, but we see stuff like that all the time in the working world.
Yeah. And I think, yeah, that's one of them is like, you just assume, you let something happen and you don't question it. And then other times is just when things are so much, you're so close to something that you just can't see you know the inefficiency there, or you can't see how many decisions you're making, like the whole like decision fatigue. Can you make things more efficient by kind of pre-making decisions and not having to have people either come and ask you or try to track things down themselves?
Yeah. Okay. So a couple more questions for you before we wrap up, Sean. I know you love Excel. You have a lot of talent there. There are many people who run away from Excel. I came up in insurance and consulting, and so I spent a lot of time with Excel. And I like to think I'm pretty good, but I've seen your skills. You're far and away better than I am, and I don't use it a lot anymore, but I still see the value. Why should people think about using Excel more often? Or not that we need to encourage people to, right? But I think there's a lot of capabilities there that people get intimidated and think, well, I'm never going to use that. When even if you're not an engineer, there's a lot of uses for Excel or Google Sheets or whatever it may be, right? That can help you in your job or your career or your business.
Yeah, and I've gotten into a lot more of Google Sheets, and I know like even with Excel online versions, like the more things go as we kind of head along, I'm not sure how much there might be less and less of like desktop version of Excel, but that's the
Mhm.
desktop version is where you can really um, automate a lot of things, and I've done so many different things over the years, but I feel like a lot of it's just either you don't know, just like anything that I'm kind of maybe intimidated by. I don't have time to get into. And so I kind of stick with what I know about it. And that's most of the people I end up working with, where I work or wherever. That's kind of most of them are in the same boat. Like, um, and I love teaching and being able to help. So like if they've got some issue or they're like, hey, I wish I didn't have to spend an hour on this every day, like, hey, let's take a look at it, show them what I'm doing, how to do it, and maybe it's macros or Visual Basic or something
Mhm.
like that. But like Excel, the thing about it is it's like I don't even know. I've tapped into a lot of it, but
Yeah.
I know that there's so much more that I haven't tapped into, and it's all in this, thing that some people may just use for adding a couple numbers together.
Right, but even just like the capabilities for organization and tabulation and just keeping things organized. I use it all the time for every event that I'm running, not just for financials, but tracking speakers and all kinds of things. There's so many things you can do. And on that note, one thing you can do that I got to see you showcase your skills with Excel last time I saw you working in it was at sometime in the beginning of the pandemic, I think in early 2020, you started a push-up challenge with a bunch of friends in a group, and I jumped in on that. And I'm a regular at the gym, but my gym closed just like everybody else. And like, okay, let's go do this push-up challenge. And you had a bunch of friends jump into this, and you had columns for every person. And then each day throughout the month, and we actually put in how many push-ups we did that day, reminding each other that it's not necessarily a competition, right? Like there are some people that are just never going to do as many as I do, and I might not be able to do as many as somebody else, but we can track the progress and hope that we're all growing and improving. But there's a lot of things you can do with that, and it created a lot of accountability, right? Where you go in,
Hmm.
you see like, oh, Sean did 150 push-ups today. Like I want to get in there and do 150 push-ups as well. And it was really motivating. And like all we needed was this Google sheet to track what was going on. And I think I stayed pretty fit and did more push-ups than I ever have done in my life that month because of that spreadsheet you created.
Yeah, and that it's interesting. Well, one, for anyone who doesn't know, Andy, I think the one day you did like 1,000, right? So it was kind of crazy.
I did
But
500 one day, and then somebody was like, maybe you could do 1,000. And then so a friend challenged me, and I think he made 800 and I got to 1,000. That was a good day. A lot of push-ups.
But one thing I loved it, and it was that was through Google Sheets. But one thing I loved about it was and this is, even outside of the Google thing or the spreadsheet thing is, for me that was just like I view things in spreadsheets a lot of times, right? So I was just like, hey, I'm gonna start doing these push-ups. Is anyone want to join me? Whoever, whatever it is for whoever's listening, right? Whatever your thing is, maybe you like knitting, like how can you get other people, how can you either help people with that or get other people involved and create a community? And I didn't know what was going to happen with that, and threw it out there, and all of a sudden, yeah, we filled up all those slots, and I loved it because we had people in that group that were, couldn't even do a push-up or were afraid to do a push-up. And I think we had like a Facebook group, where we're posting videos, and it became a really cool thing for me. And you show up in the Google sheet, and it was almost like you're saying, being at the gym, because the gyms were closed.
Yeah.
So it'd show up in there like, hey, Andy just posted 60 more push-ups or whatever. And then I ended up from there, I think in total, I did another one with a one group of mine, some guys to get together with, and our families. And so our kids were doing it, and they were in there. And then, I guess you just never know. You do the thing that you are passionate about, or well, and you never know what can happen from that.
Yeah, this is bigger than just a Google sheet or a spreadsheet. I thought a lot about that push-up challenge that you started because just one little idea of I want to do more push-ups this month. I'm going to challenge myself. Who wants to join me? And then a bunch of people jumping in and creating a spreadsheet to track it has such a huge ripple effect on the world, because there were 25 people or so in there who were all probably doing more push-ups than they would have normally done, probably engaging in more fitness that month than they would have normally. Even those of us who go to the gym, there was a tendency to just get lazy because the gym was closed, but because everybody was doing push-ups, like, okay, I'm going to go do that. There were some people in there who had never done push-ups before, who were like learning how to do them for the first time. Right. And it's like, no matter who we are, you don't have to be some big name person with a huge following. Any of us can make a difference in the world and impact the lives of others, influencing 3 or 4 people to eat healthier or get in better shape, right? Or go talk to your boss, or like figure out where you want to go in your career, or whatever it may be. Like, we all have an opportunity to make an impact, which you just set a great example of that. And I was so excited about that. And I've thought about it often. One more question I want to ask you, Shawn, as you've gone through your career and all the stuff that you've done, what's an important lesson that you've learned from your career that you take with you into the future?
I don't know. I'm big on, yeah, my job is about, the results are having quality parts and keeping our machines running, everything. But like, at least for me, I found that valuing people, like I wherever I've worked or whoever I've worked with, I feel like God's placed me there for a reason. So I like to get to know, one, like value who someone, people I'm working with, get to know their names, find out like what they like to do outside of work. Cause really everybody's there. They're there to provide for their families or whatever, but like, you only have one chance to live this life. And so I think, wherever you find yourself and whatever group you're working with or interacting with is, get to know people, value them, see how you can encourage them. The things we're talking about today, right? Like, how can, what are they into that they can make a difference? And maybe they feel like they've never done it because they're like, well, who am I? So, but I think above all else, whether it's your family, your friends, how can you build up other people around you?
I love that lesson, just treating others well, leading with curiosity and kindness, and seeing how you can help other people around you is always, that's worked out well for me, and I can see how it has for you. Last question, Shawn. This podcast is called the Own Your Career Show. My book is called Own Your Career, Own Your Life. By the way, today is the 1-year anniversary of publishing this book. Thank you. November 16th, 2020, this book came out. So its birthday is today. Happy birthday, book. When you hear that title, Own Your Career, Own Your Career, Own Your Life, what does that mean to you?
I'm, I'm big on like assessments. I mean, I don't love taking a bunch of assessments, but like I think understanding how we're wired and what we're passionate about, and the more we can get to know ourselves, the more we can see what opportunities are out there that are a really good fit for us. And you see people that, I happen to have stayed in engineering and manufacturing all these years, and it's really fit with who I am. And as long as I've got, the people to interact with, and it's just been a good fit. Other people I've known, like my roommate in college, like we took all the same classes and he ended up in, IT work, and he's loved that. But like being willing to be curious, see what's out there. There's jobs that maybe you don't even know about. And the more people like you that, are interviewing people all the time in all these different areas, and really inspiring other people to kind of take a look at, like, do you have to stay in this? Maybe it's the field you're in, or the specific job you're in. There's so many opportunities. I mean, look at every place that's out there is looking for people. You can, the Starbucks by us doesn't open till 10 in the morning because there's no one to work there. Like, so there's so many opportunities more than ever before to explore areas that are, a really good fit for you. And so, yeah, you've been a great ambassador for that. And like, you've really challenged me with that to kind of look at myself, and I think the more, like I say, the more we get to know our skills and where we want to go, and just be willing to not be afraid to explore that and see what would happen.
Love that. Thank you, Shawn, for coming on and sharing. I really appreciate that, and everything that you shared today. Shawn Washburn is the host of the Engineering Your Business podcast. I put his website on the screen there, shawnwashburn.com. I know you're active on LinkedIn and other social media channels as well. So I assume people can reach out to you to connect, and of course, follow along with your podcast. And by the way, why should people tune into your podcast? What can people expect from that show?
Yeah, a lot of the stuff that we talked about today, people, processes, curiosity, and just kind of how that relates to other areas that aren't, manufacturing, and also the creativity side. Like I say, if you could take all of me or none of me, like who I am, when you listen to some of the episodes, I mean, I write odes about different things in the office and just kind of try to have fun with what we're doing. Work can be kind of tough sometimes. So like, how can we lighten things up? But this podcast is a daily, well, you've challenged me. Now I got to get back on it. I haven't even touched this mic in months because of stuff that I'm going through, but like, it was a daily podcast. I'm going to get back into it, and it's just small chunks each day. So the idea was, you can listen on your way to work or wherever, and little bite-sized things to get you thinking about, whatever's going on in your current workplace.
Yeah, get back on it. I would love to see that. And of course, we all have seasons, things we go through. But it could be helpful. And I know you'll help a lot of people by getting that stuff back out there. Well, Shawn, thank you so much for coming on and sharing. I really appreciate it. Always love talking with you, and look forward to best of luck with your career. Look forward to keeping in touch.
Yeah, thanks so much, Andy. It was awesome.
All right, take care.